Welcome to the Solution Cup, where we turn concerns into action and ideas into impact, so you can be the change you want to see in the world. I am your host, Kevin Spencer Beckford, and I'm here with my executive producer, Jazzy T from Jazz Pratcast Pros.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. It is so exciting to film the pilot episode here in the podcast studio in person. So what we want to do today is just let people get to know you a little bit more. So I'm actually going to ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, sounds good. So first of all, the Solutions Cup podcast. Why did you decide to start a podcast and why now?
So the timing is really important. I'm 61. I just turned 61 in December. I'm originally from the Caribbean. I was born in Jamaica and grew up in the Bahamas, where I spent about 18 years. So I've been in this country now for over 40 years. My entire life has been based in service in one way, shape, or form. And particularly once I got into a leadership role, I saw the importance of leaders that understood their place in terms of serving not just the needs of the employees and the business, but the community you live and work in. And so I've actually spent a life of understanding that our role when we come into life, from my perspective, is to try to leave it better than we met it. And so therefore, whether that be your job, your neighborhood, your community, to really always have that sort of filter that you look at the world through. And so I spent my whole career, 18 years in Eastman Kodak, 10 years in banking, 7 years in healthcare, navigating that space and really looking at not just solving the business problem people hired me for, but serving the need and usually address broader issues that sometimes was not even on the radar. And so for me, when I think about the body of work of service that I've been able to accrue over time, I really felt that it was a responsibility for me right now as you evolve, that, there's more time behind me than there is ahead of me. Yeah. And so as a servant leader, you have to decide on what tools you have. And one of the things that I have that's been very helpful to me is I have a broad network. Yeah. I have people that have seen my body of work, they've benefited from it in some cases, and also even in my community work, I still do that today. So what I want to do is leave behind a legacy, something that outlives me. And so it's sort of, think of it this way, to use an analogy of a plant. Sometimes we plant a seed for a plant we may never see grow, or whose fruit you may never taste. And so for me, the Solutions Cup is essentially a vehicle I would like to get started with as the first toast. But I think eventually I envision where when it's time for me to sort of exit stage left, there will be another host. But what will stay the same is really making it clear to everyone that is listening, no matter who you are, no matter what position you're in, no matter how much agency, position, power you think you have, you can actually create meaningful change. Some of the most extraordinary changes comes from ordinary people. Sometimes the change we're looking from extraordinary people doesn't happen because they don't even understand their power, their position, or agency. So my goal is very simple. I would like the Solution Cup to be a vehicle, a forum where I can bring leaders in who understands this, who are doing it, to not just encourage you to do the same or consider it, but in fact, how you can help them.
Okay. So we have tons of news shows, news podcasts, things like that. And they're always talking about, here's the problem, get all riled up, right? And then the listener's like, okay, now I'm all angry. What can I do about it? And so with the Solutions Cup, I know our aim as your producer and really under your vision is to provide solutions and also to be able to follow up. So as we have some of these leaders, maybe they're in a elected official role and they're proposing solutions, right, yes, to get on the ballot or to get your vote, but you're actually going to hold them accountable. Tell us a little bit about how you plan to do that.
Well, I think to be honest with you, it's really simple. Like many people, I have my favorite podcasts that I listen to. Some are to inspire me, some are just to comfort me, some are to learn. But the ones that are issues-based, where they'll bring on a guest that will sometimes educate you on a problem, and sometimes it's to tell you about a problem. It may not necessarily include education. So something bad is happening. But if you don't understand the scaffolding of that problem, the DNA of the problem, it's hard to know exactly then how do you address it. So sometimes a problem doesn't necessarily need one person to address it. it really needs a much more of a holistic approach towards changing it.
Yeah.
For example, I really believe that podcasts that inform and educate are good, but I also believe that there's something missing. I think of podcasts that talk about problems that don't provide some sort of a framework for how you could solve it is a cake without icing, or a meal without dessert. It's good, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
And so I find myself going to, sometimes it's public events where they will have something that they share and maybe even have a panel discussion. And then people walk away talking about, hey, I didn't know about this problem. I can't believe this is happening. But they also feel powerless. And in fact, in some cases, it can make people do less because they'll go, this problem is so big, nobody can do anything about it. I remember as a kid growing up in the islands, and I was born in Jamaica, but I ended up growing up in the Bahamas because my dad was working for the Bahamian government. So I spent my summers in Jamaica with my grandparents, but most of the year, for 18 years, I lived in Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas, or Freeport, Grand Bahama. So we're always surrounded by water. So a good analogy for problems is that problem is so big, don't even bother because you can't boil the ocean. It's as big as the ocean.
Yeah.
And so my mom would always remind us that our role was never to really address the ocean, but you're a cup of the ocean. So if you see a problem, no matter how big or small, no matter where it is, your first question is, what's my proximity to this problem? How can I affect change with this problem? Do I see it? Do I encounter it every day? Do I encounter it once a month? Is this something that I have a position in? And that's the position part. And then what power do I have? Am I in a position where I have authority to change it? So if I'm a CEO of a company and I walk away from a panel discussion that talks about the poverty wage, or you see something where they're working poor. Rochester is a good example. We have over 20,000 people that are working poor, working multiple jobs, stitching it together to make a livable wage.
Right.
And if I'm a CEO and I get that and it bothers me enough that I maybe even pray about it or maybe even donate to the food pantry, you should be looking in the mirror to say, I have a position and a power, an agency to raise a livable wage for all of my employees so that doesn't happen.
So let me interject here. So when I was sharing with a couple of our friends and clients that you were coming on the Jazzcast Pros Network, and they got really excited and their eyes lit up and they said, Kevin Beckford from U of R? So can you talk a little bit about the role that you had there and how you were able to help people get some livable wages?
Well, I tell you, it was really powerful because, I was a senior director for equity and inclusion at a staff of only 7 people supporting 32,000, 20,000 in the medical space and 12,000 in our 7 colleges. And when I started looking at our pay structure, we were actually paying at the time for full-time jobs, $11.80 an hour, which was minimum wage at the time.
And what year was this?
This is going back 2017.
Okay.
And
not too long ago.
Not too long ago.
$11, 2017.
Yeah. Oh, and well, the thing is that, and the part of it is that it was certainly a minimum wage, but it was not meant to be a target. It's saying, we don't want you to pay less than that. But I think that, so one of the challenges is that, when we think about poverty, we tend to think of a food pantry. We think about, clothing giveaways, backpack giveaways. I see it differently. The root cause of the problem is pay.
Right.
Not the backpack, not the food. If I give you enough money, you don't need to go to the food pantry.
Right.
And so the solution to some of these problems are not just clear and present in front of us. What it's lacking is courage. So one of the things that was good for me in that role is that I have always had clarity around my position behind agency. So which means I have a level of courage that is limitless. You can make that change.
Was there a turning point when you saw a problem, you knew the system alone wouldn't fix it?
My role on the Rochester-Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative was very educational for me. Until I joined that committee representing the University of Rochester, I did not know that we had over 20,000 people that were considered working poor. So these were folks stitching together 2 to 3 jobs to essentially put together a livable wage. That made me really look closely at not just the problem that I saw in the stats that were shared. I went back to the U of R and I asked for a pull of all of our data. And I was able to look at it and go like, oh my goodness, we are actually hiring some people at $11.80 an hour. We're actually part of the problem. So then I was able to take that education, bring that back into talking to senior leaders, both at HR, folks that had a number of employees, to say, you have discrepancy when you're hiring. So even though that is there in the system and you can say yes to that, you can bring people in higher. And the reason why you should is because we are actually part of the problem. We're actually sitting on a committee for the county, and we're part of the problem. So therefore, we should be leading the way and modeling it to make sure we did it. So the nice thing is that eventually the U of R did make a move to move their lower pay up to a more livable wage. So right now, a job where you're in a doctor's office checking in patients that used to be more minimum wage is now, $20 an hour. Which is a more livable wage. And so, and again, I don't want to take credit for all of that, but what I did was I took the information and I shared it with people who have position, power, and agency, and to share with them, you actually can change this. If you're an advocate for it, it can happen. And sometimes people just didn't know that they literally, they had a heart for the problem. They would donate towards it. They'd even pray for people that are poor, but they didn't realize that if you actually are in a position to set pay, if you took a look at our overall pay structure on the very high end to the very low end, it is possible to bring up the low end to livable wage, fixed wage compression, and then you live with that going forward. So every time you do that 2% a year, you're moving everybody forward with the cost of living. But then you eliminate this idea of paying people poverty wages. I have to be honest with you, it was really wonderful to see RMAPI take that initiative, and they championed it throughout Monroe County, and it's called a Level Up campaign. Aqua Porter, who's amazing, someone is one of my favorite people in the world and my hero. She made it socially acceptable and almost a little bit of pressure to say, you can't be on this committee as one of the guiding leaders, and you actually are part of the problem. And so I have to say, I remember the day they gave out the awards when we reached, I forget how many thousands of people that we brought up from a livable wage. We had RGH was there. U of R was there. And I remember, and because I demonstrated that same concept as an elected official, because what I did in Pittsford, as the first African-American to be elected to Pittsford Town Board, I took that same knowledge, again, imagine that same knowledge from RMAPI, and I ended up bringing it to the town board to say, we're also part of the problem. We will no longer pay minimum wage for people that are coming in for permanent jobs, not seasonal jobs, but permanent jobs, so that we are not part of the problem. So I was able to not only get that done in 1 year, and we codified it so we would never have to revisit it. So the same issue on a large scale at U of R was over a $2 billion organization. I did that for a town as an elected official, which meant any town could do that. So I ended up receiving an award that day for being one of the leaders around that. And I was really smiling from ear to ear because right next to me was President Mangelsdorf, the president of the University of Rochester, who was now doing that for all of the employees. And so to me, it's an example of where never underestimate how what you're doing, how it can influence a bigger system. So that pebble in the pond is real. You may be that pebble. Don't miss that opportunity.
And to add to that, what would you say is one of the biggest problems we're facing in society?
One of the things that hits me personally was Social Security. And so, as I mentioned, we moved here for, really for a better life and to go to college and so on. And my mom came up with us. And so she worked for about 20 years at a nursing home, had a really good job. She loved the job. It was a vocation for her as a certified nursing assistant. In fact, she was their top CNA. And in fact, we now have a Jean Beckford Servant Leadership Award that is where I give a monetary award out to CNAs at St. John's Nursing Home that embodies servant leadership. So she has now a permanent legacy place there. When she retired at the age of 70, her Social Security was barely $700 a month.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time thinking, how would you live if you didn't have a son like me? That I was like, I got you, no worries.
Right.
So my mom never wanted for anything. She always lived with us. I always bought a house bigger than what I needed. And we made sure that she was always comfortable and took care of her right until her last days. And so for me, it was really clear to me that we have a social safety net that isn't really a net at all. It's there. It had a good idea initially, and when it got started, it really worked well But the problem is that the people who designed it at the time put a cap on the amount of money that could go into it from your income. And part of the reason I would suspect is that the people who designed it made more money and they wanted to put a limit on it, or else why would you put a cap? Right? So if you make more money, you should pay right into it. Most Americans don't realize that just 20 years ago was $100,000. If you make more than that, you don't pay into Social Security at all. It stops. Today it's about $167,000.
Wait, hold on. Okay. So you're saying the person who makes $30,000 a year, they're paying into Social Security, what is it, 8%?
It's about 8% of your income.
8%
and
of
if
your
you
income.
get pay raises over time and you make, today $167,000, you still pay 8%. But when you get above that $167,000, you pay zero. So all of a sudden your paycheck goes up. So if you made $200,000,
Wait. So instead of paying 10% or 15 or 20 or something that's even more that you can afford, you now paid
zero.
Nothing.
Right. So that means that if you make $200,000, you only pay Social Security tax on the first $167,000 to really demonstrate how egregious this is. Warren Buffett, who makes $40 billion a year, he pays the same into Social Security as somebody who makes $167,000. When you hear people on the news, regardless of party, say that we can't afford Social Security, that it is underfunded, it's going to run out of money, what you should ask them is to say, why are you not removing the cap? Or, in fact, to be clear, they've actually tried to remove the cap, but they're moving it up slightly each year.
Okay.
So it used to be 100,000, now it's 167, but it's taking a long time to get there.
Yeah.
To me, a very nuanced solution would be simple. You would say, okay, we'll keep doing that. So we'll keep, think of it this way. It's going to get more and more. But then what you do is you start at 500,000 above and say, we're going to start taxing you right now. So if you make $1 million, so you will pay 8% all the way up to that because you make 500,000. But if you only make 200,000, you'll come under the sort of the gradual increase, and we'll eventually get to you. And what that will do is that would make sure that people who are making significant amount of income will really equitably pay into Social Security. And then what that would do is not only immediately bring it to the place where it would be not only fully funded, you could raise the minimum payout to maybe $2,000 a month. So you could lift a lot of our senior citizens out of poverty. And also, they won't need some of these social safety nets anymore, which is a true solution. And so, that's a little bit of a teaser, because at some point we're going to have a show that we're going to focus for 1 hour on just Social Security. And we're going to be asking our elected officials, what are you doing to modify that to where you're not just addressing it to eventually get there, but to really go after the folks that are making over $500,000 to make sure they pay their fair share. This is really not about taking something from them that we shouldn't have. They are here, they're paid an income, and they should pay into Social Security. Why? Because we have senior citizens that need to live in dignity. And I look at it a little bit differently too. When you look at someone who is a waitress or waiter, because they love that's the hospitality industry, and you spend your entire life doing that, but you never made enough money. And like my mom was an example. She cared for people in their most vulnerable part of their life. And what society said to that was that we need that role. That's why we pay you to do it. But when you retire, you will live with less dignity than when you were working. That's how I look at that.
Wow. What is one small action that someone could take after listening to this to move from concern to contribution?
I think it's, and then my hope is through the podcast over time, by showing and lifting up and giving visibility to various people doing this type of work in small ways and in big ways, it will inspire people to go, well, wait a minute, I can do that. And so a very, very small kind of a teaser example is that what I did at the U of R, I couldn't make that decision because I was the senior director for equity. I wasn't CEO.
Yeah.
I wasn't the president. What I could do, my cup of the problem was education. Because sometimes if you can't change leaders, you change the people. Because there are more people than leaders. And so one of the things I decided at U of R was if I could educate folks on where we are and contributed to where we are, because sometimes things are structural, but it doesn't have a label on it. And so therefore, my role at that time was to say, like one of the things that was obvious to me at U of R, we had, 93% of our leaders were white, 2.64% were African-American, and 1.6 were Hispanic, from first supervision all the way to president.
Yeah.
People didn't know that. Why? Because you're in your department.
Right.
You don't even think about it. So once I raised that level to say, just so you know, the problem you have in surgery or in nursing or in radiology, it's a problem we all have. And oh, by the way, here's some things we could do to fix that.
And so as a part of your job, you also had something to do with recruitment.
Yes.
And I know there's a very interesting story that I feel everybody, and I'm going to let you tell the story. But if people are saying, oh, well, we would love to hire more of this, that, and the third, but we just don't know where to find them. Like we hear that all the time. Like, oh, we would love to have more Black people in leadership, but they're just not qualified. We just don't know where they are. Right. And so during pandemic time, you knew that essential workers had to still go to work. Right.
Yes.
You also heard a story about limited amount of rideshare drivers.
Yes.
And so you were able to take a position as a rideshare driver, literally pick these people up and say, hey, you ever thought about U of R? Tell us that story.
So what happened was during the pandemic, and you teed it up well, I was just listening to the news and, like all of us at the time, feeling pretty helpless, stuck at home, and when I heard that, they're limited drivers because people are afraid to drive. So what I decided to do, at the time, without permission of my wife, because she would decide I was crazy, I signed up to be a driver, and I learned how to do it. I did all the paperwork, took out the insurance stuff, all that stuff squared away. And then what I'd do is I would drive into the middle of the city, and I had my disinfectant thing, wipes, so that in between each driver, I'd wipe everything down. I had extra mask in case I didn't have it, but most people did. And so when they'd get into the car with, my usual friendly, how you doing? And, so you mind if I ask, what do you do for a living? And there were almost always, because at the time, these were all people going to nursing homes, private type things, and so on.
And what they didn't know is you're in the cash cab.
Yeah, exactly. Because and inevitably, almost to a person, they seem very frustrated because they're underpaid, and they weren't getting benefits for the most of them. And so what I would do is I would look for an opening, and I would just say, by any chance, I said, have you ever thought about working for the University of Rochester? And they said, yeah, it's hard I've applied, I've never heard anything, and I don't know how. I said, well, if you don't mind, I said, let me give you my card. I guarantee if you reach out to me, I can get you an exploratory interview. I said, we have, quite a few jobs that are open. We are always looking for people, and we provide full-time employment, and we have a full benefits and regular hours. And so if you're interested, give me a call. And usually it was met with, I'm sorry, who are you?
Wait a minute.
And so I said, I'm the Senior Director of Equity and Inclusion for the University of Rochester. And so I was like, well, why are you doing this? I said, well, because this is my way to help. I said, when I took a look at what I was seeing on the news, I didn't want to just be inspired and then to pray for you. I want to help get you to work.
So, Kevin, really what you just said totally embodies logo or slogan, be the change you wish to see. And you were that change. And so final thoughts on if somebody's just scrolling upon this podcast right now and they're like, who is this guy? He's kind of interesting, right? What's going on here? What kind of things can they look forward to? I mean, why should they hit that subscribe and the notification bell on Solutions Cup?
Well, I tell you, it's very simple. It will give you hope. I am, people who know me in my personal life and even in business, they're generally, one of the questions I usually get from people that don't know me well, go like, how are you always so upbeat? And it's simply because despite the challenges going on in the world today, I'm always clear on what I can do to be part of the change. And so, when I see people are being mean-spirited on the news, I just make sure I'm the one putting more love in the world.
Yeah.
It's that simple. So my hope is, please give us an opportunity to help you to see the world differently. One thing I can guarantee you is that if you continue to be a part of this movement, it's not just a podcast, I will give you an opportunity to put a prescription in your lens, permanent, on how you see the world. So therefore, you will never feel disempowered because there's always something you can do.
I love that. So make sure you like and subscribe, share this podcast with a friend or family member, a concerned citizen, anyone who feels like they want to not just, react to a problem, but they want to understand the problem and then take an action and find their cup.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. We'll see you next time. I'll have this handed over to Kevin, but it was such a pleasure to be here as your co-host today. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
So what's your cup? Join us on the Solution Cup with Kevin Spencer Beckford on the Jazzcast Pro Network.